3 years after the fever took my family away, I thought nothing could move my dead heart until… Are you curious? Let's explore the next details of the story together. I am Elias Holt, a 48-year-old rancher living alone in a dilapidated cabin in the middle of a snowy field in a remote rural area. Tonight, a blizzard is raging outside, as if nature itself is trying to tear apart everything that is left of this world. The wind whistles through the cracks in the wooden walls, bringing with it a biting cold, but I no longer care. It has been 3 years since the evil plague called fever took my gentle wife Sarah and my little daughter Emily with a smile brighter than the sun. 3 years of living like a shadow, tending the cows, mending fences, and trying to block out memories of happy times. But tonight, everything changed forever. Before we dive in, smash that like button if you're ready for a wild story, and drop a 1 in the comments to join the adventure. Stick around. There's a jaw-dropping twist at the end. I sat at the kitchen table, a plate of cold potatoes in front of me that I had not touched. The only candle in the room flickered, casting shadows on the bare walls where Sarah's embroidery had hung. I looked at my rough hands, the calluses telling the story of a man who had only worked to forget his pain. The coffee cup in my hand had long since cooled, but I held it tight, as if it were the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. Outside, the storm howled like a wild animal, and I thought, perhaps it was like me. All it could do was roar without purpose. Then, amid the howling wind, another sound came. A knock, faint but insistent, cut through the deathly silence of the house. I stiffened, my heart pounding in my chest. Who would wander out in this storm? The nearest town, Copper Creek, was a day's journey away, and the nearest neighbor was 15 miles to the west. I stood, the wooden chair scraping against the floor. My hand went to the rifle hanging on the wall, not because I was afraid, but because I had learned that the world was no longer safe, not since the plague came and took everything. The knock came again, more urgent, and a voice trembled through the wind. Please, please, we're freezing out here. The voice was a young girl, no more than 16, but filled with a desperation I'd only heard in my own nightmares. I walked to the door, my hand gripping the latch, but my heart wavered. Sarah always said I had a soft heart, though I tried to hide it with a gruff exterior. But that was Sarah, and I was just a farmhand living to die. Opening the door to strangers was asking for trouble, and I had enough trouble for 10 lifetimes. We have children. Her voice rang out again, weak and pleading. Please, just one night. I peered through the small pane of glass in the door, trying to penetrate the white snow. Shadows appeared, small, shivering, clinging to each other like rabbits in a storm. There were too many to count in the darkness, but I could see the desperation in their movements. My heart clenched. I thought of Emily, the little girl with the curly brown hair who used to run to me when the thunder scared her. The memory stabbed me like a knife in the chest. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to get involved with anyone. But Sarah's eyes, even as a memory, were staring at me, reminding me of the man I had promised to become. Fuck, I muttered, and yanked the latch. The wind ripped the door from my hands, snow flying into my face like tiny knives. There were 6 children before me, the youngest looking about 5, to the oldest, a girl with piercing blue eyes and tangled red hair frozen in the snow. The oldest was clutching a tiny child who looked faint from exhaustion, her lips blue from the cold. Thank God, the older girl whispered, her breath making white clouds in the air. We've been walking for days, sir. The kids can't take it anymore. I scanned the group, my heart heavy. Their clothes were torn, their feet wrapped in rags for shoes, their faces gaunt with hunger and cold. These were no ordinary lost children. These were fugitives. And from the look on their faces, I knew they were running from something terrible. Come in, before you all freeze to death, I said, more gruffly than I intended. I stepped aside, letting the children stumble into the warm kitchen. The smell of fear and despair followed them, mingling with the chill of the storm. The eldest girl, who introduced herself as Clara Boone, gently placed the baby, named Lily, on the wooden bench near the hearth. The others huddled around the hearth, their small, trembling hands reaching out to warm themselves. I watched them, feeling uneasy. The bruises on their skinny arms, the scars that showed through their torn shirts, the way they flinched when I accidentally knocked a spoon over the table, all told a story I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. "What's your name?" I asked Clara, my voice dry as if I were trying to distance myself from my own emotions. "Clara Boone, sir," she said, her chin held high despite her chattering teeth. "This is my sister Lily, and these are the others, from where we came from." I frowned and walked to the pantry, taking out some dry bread and a piece of salted meat, the few things left over from the long winter. "Where do you come from?" I asked, my voice low as I placed the food on the table. Clara glanced quickly toward the door, as if afraid someone might be listening. "River Hollow Orphanage, sir. 3 days north." The name hit me like a punch in the gut. I'd heard whispers about River Hollow when I'd gone to Copper Creek to trade, a place that supposedly cared for orphans, but stories told of disappearing children, of the cruelty of the caretaker, Jeremiah Kane, and things adults didn't dare mention in front of children. "You ran away," I said, not as a question. Clara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "We had to." A small boy, maybe 8, named Ben spoke suddenly. Jonah, a small boy, maybe 8, named Jonah, spoke suddenly, his voice shaking with emotion. "They were going to sell Lily to a rich man. They said she was pretty enough to make a lot of money." Clara cut in, her voice sharp. "Shut up, Jonah, don't say it." But I had heard enough. Jonah's words were like another knife, cutting into what was left of my heart. Child trafficking, slavery. The words echoed in my head, stirring up a rage I thought had died with Sarah and Emily. "How long have you been there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though my hands were clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. 2 years, Clara said. "They took us from other towns, when our families died or couldn't keep us anymore. They said they'd give us a good home, but—" Her voice trailed off, and I could fill in the blanks. I'd seen enough cruelty in the world to know how stories like this ended. Orphans disappearing into the shadows, used, discarded like trash. "They'll come after you," I said, my voice low. Clara nodded, her blue eyes determined despite her fear. "Mr. Kane doesn't let his treasures run away. He has men after him, vicious men with guns and hounds." She looked straight at me. "You can't keep us. If they find us here, they'll hurt you." But as she spoke, Lily whimpered in her sleep and Jonah began to cough, a deep, watery cough that signaled the onset of pneumonia. The others looked as if they might collapse on the spot. I watched them, my heart racing. I should feed them, let them rest, and send them on their way with some supplies. It was the safest option. But one look at Lily's pale face told me they wouldn't survive another day out there. Then I heard the sound of hooves, faint but distinct, coming through the storm. Clara turned, her face white. "They found us," she whispered. The sound grew louder, like thunder cutting through the wind. The children panicked, Clara pulling Lily toward the back of the kitchen, the others huddled against the wall as if to melt into the wood. Their fear tightened my chest, awakening a rage I hadn't felt since burying Sarah and Emily. I had lost everything once, but tonight I wouldn't let these children lose their last hope. "Hold up, things are about to get wild." If you're hooked on Elias and the kids' fight for survival, smash that like button and drop a butt in the comments to keep the vibe going. Trust me, the twist coming up will blow your mind. Stick around. The wind howled like a pack of wolves outside my farmhouse, but inside, the air was thick with fear and the faint warmth of my kitchen stove. 6 children, ragged and shivering, crowded around the flickering fire, their eyes wide with terror. Clara Boone, the eldest, stood protectively over her little sister Lily, who lay unconscious on the wooden bench, her tiny chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. The other kids, Jonah, Sam, Beth, Jenny, and Marcus, clung to each other, their faces etched with hunger and exhaustion. They'd been running for days, Clara had said, fleeing from the River Hollow Orphanage, a place I'd heard whispered about in Copper Creek as a den of horrors masquerading as charity. I didn't want to believe the stories of children disappearing, of beatings and worse, but looking at these kids, their bruises and hollow eyes told me more than I needed to know. I'd just set a plate of stale bread and salted beef on the table when the sound of hoofbeats cut through the storm. My heart sank like a stone in a frozen river. Clara's head snapped toward the door, her green eyes wide with panic. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. The kids scrambled, instinctively pressing themselves against the walls as if they could melt into the wood and disappear. Jonah, the smallest boy, started coughing, a wet, rattling sound that made my gut twist. I grabbed my rifle from the wall, my hand steady despite the storm raging inside me. 3 years ago, I'd buried my wife, Sarah, and our daughter, Emily, in the frozen ground behind this house. I'd sworn never to let anyone close again, but these kids, they were here, in my home, looking to me for protection. And damn it, I couldn't turn away. The hoofbeats grew louder, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock counting down to doom. A sharp knock echoed through the house, not the desperate plea of the children, but the commanding rap of men who expected obedience. "Open the door!" a voice barked, deep and laced with menace. "We're here for the runaways. We know they're in there." I glanced at Clara, who shook her head frantically, her lips trembling. "It's Amos Vaughn," she whispered. "Kane's enforcer. He'll kill you if you don't give us up." Her words hit me like a punch, but it was the fear in her eyes. Fear not just for herself, but for the others, that made my blood boil. I moved to the door, rifle in hand, and peered through the small, frost-covered window. 3 men stood on my porch, their silhouettes blurred by the swirling snow. The leader, tall and lean, wore a long black coat that made him look like death itself. His eyes, pale and cold, gleamed in the faint light from my kitchen. 2 others flanked him, rough-looking men with scars and the kind of posture that said they'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. "You've got 10 seconds, farmer," the leader, Vaughn, I assumed, called out. "Hand over the kids, or we come in and take them." My mind raced. I could give them up. It'd be the easy choice, the safe one. I'd spent 3 years avoiding trouble, keeping my head down, living like a ghost. But then I looked at Lily, her tiny body curled against Clara, and I saw Emily's face, her dark curls bouncing as she ran to me during a thunderstorm. Sarah's voice echoed in my head, soft but firm. "You're a good man, Elias. Don't ever let the world make you forget that." I tightened my grip on the rifle, my jaw clenching so hard it hurt. "No kids here," I shouted back, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. "And I don't recall inviting you onto my land." A low chuckle came from Vaughn, sharp and cruel. "You're making a mistake, farmer. Those kids belong to the River Hollow home. Legal property, signed and notarized. You're harboring fugitives." Clara's voice broke through, trembling but defiant. "We never signed anything. They forged those papers." Vaughn's laugh grew colder. "The word of orphans against legal documents? Good luck with that in court." One of his men, a burly brute with a missing ear, stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "Enough talk, Amos. Let's drag them out." I didn't think. I didn't have time to. The memory of Emily's laugh, Sarah's gentle touch, and the sight of these kids, scared, beaten, but still fighting, lit a fuse inside me. "You made one mistake, Vaughn," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You think I've got something left to lose." Before he could respond, I raised my rifle and fired. The shot exploded through the kitchen, the bullet catching Vaughn square in the chest. He staggered back, his pale eyes wide with shock, then crumpled into the snow. Chaos erupted. The 2 remaining men drew their pistols, and bullets tore through the walls, splintering wood and shattering the quiet. I dove behind the heavy oak table, dragging Clara and Lily with me. "Get to the back room," I shouted, working the bolt on my rifle. The kids scrambled, their fear so thick I could taste it. But Sam, a wiry boy of 12, grabbed a poker from the fireplace and swung it at the burly man's legs as he charged in. The man howled, stumbling, and I fired again, dropping him. The 3rd man, quick and snake-like, took cover by the doorway, his pistol trained on us. "Drop the rifle, farmer, or I start shooting kids," he snarled, aiming at Beth, who was pressed against the wall, tears streaming down her face. My heart pounded, but I saw something he didn't. Clara, inching toward the kitchen counter, where my hunting knife gleamed. I met her eyes, and in that moment, we understood each other. I set the rifle down, hands raised, drawing the man's attention. "All right," I said, stepping forward. "Let's talk." But Clara was already moving, snatching the knife and lunging at the gunman. He spun toward her, too late. I tackled him, my shoulder slamming into his chest, and we crashed into the wall. The pistol fired wildly, the bullet burying itself in the ceiling. Clara drove the knife into his arm, and he screamed, dropping the gun. I grabbed it, rolled away, and fired once more, ending the fight. The kitchen fell silent, save for the wind screaming through the broken door and Jonah's ragged coughing. Blood stained the floor, and the smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Clara stood over the gunman, the knife still in her hand, her face pale but resolute. "They'll send more," she said, her voice shaking. "Vaughn wasn't alone. Kane's got men everywhere." I looked around at the destruction. My sanctuary, now a battlefield. I'd killed a man, fought others, and made enemies of people with power I couldn't hope to match. But as I looked at the kids, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and hope, I knew there was no going back. "We're not staying here," I said, my voice firm. "Grab what you can, blankets, food, anything warm. We're leaving." The blizzard raged on as we stumbled out into the night, the kids bundled in whatever coats and blankets I could find in the house. The snow was knee-deep, the wind a relentless beast that clawed at our faces. I carried Lily on my back, her small body burning with fever despite the cold. Clara supported Jonah, whose coughs were getting worse, each one like a knife in my chest. Beth, Jenny, Sam, and Marcus trudged behind, their faces pale but determined. We were headed for an old network of caves in the dense forest a few miles northeast, a place Clara said they'd heard about in whispers at the orphanage, a hidden refuge where runaways could disappear. But every step felt like a gamble with death, the storm and the hunters both closing in. I'd lost everything 3 years ago, but now, with these kids depending on me, I felt a spark of something I thought was gone. Purpose. Sarah used to say that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were stacked against you. I didn't know if I believed that anymore, but looking at Lily's fragile form, I knew I couldn't let her die out here. Not like Emily. Not again. The forest loomed ahead, a dark wall of pines barely visible through the snow. My boots sank deep with every step, and the kids were struggling, their small bodies no match for the cold. Jonah's coughs were relentless now, and Beth was shivering so hard, I worried she'd collapse. "Keep moving," I urged, my voice hoarse against the wind. "We're almost there." But I wasn't sure if I was convincing them or myself. The caves were our only hope, but they were still miles away, and the hoofbeats I'd heard earlier were a constant reminder that Kane's men weren't far behind. An hour into our trek, I heard it again, the faint thud of hooves growing louder despite the storm. My blood ran cold. "Down!" I hissed, pushing the kids behind a cluster of snow-covered boulders. They dropped instantly, their breaths coming in quick, panicked gasps. I crouched beside them, peering through the swirling snow. 6 riders emerged, their figures ghostly in the blizzard. They moved in a search pattern, methodical, like wolves hunting a wounded deer. "Spread out!" one of them shouted, his voice carrying a cruel edge. "They're close. I can feel it." Clara's hand gripped my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "That's Caleb Dre," she whispered. "He's worse than Vaughn. He doesn't just catch runaways. He enjoys it." I saw the fear in her face, but also something else. Defiance. These kids had been through hell, and they were still fighting. I couldn't let them down. "Stay quiet," I said, my voice low. "No matter what." Beth whimpered, and Marcus gently covered her mouth, his own face tight with fear. The riders passed within 100 yards, close enough that I could see the steam rising from their horses' nostrils. One of them, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, reined in his horse and studied the ground. "Tracks here," he called out. "Fresh, heading northeast." My heart sank. In our haste, I hadn't covered our trail well enough. The snow was falling hard, but not fast enough to erase the footprints of 7 people. "How many?" another rider asked. "All of them, plus an adult," the scarred man replied, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "They're slow, dragging kids. We'll have them in an hour." I felt the weight of their words like a noose tightening around my neck. These men were mounted, well-armed, and moving faster than we ever could. Worse, they were heading toward the caves, our supposed sanctuary. Clara's voice trembled as she leaned close. "We won't make it, Elias. They'll catch us before we reach the caves. I looked at the kids, their faces pale and drawn, Jonah's coughs growing weaker, Lily's feverish murmurs cutting through me like a blade. They were right. We couldn't outrun these men, but I could give them a chance. "Clara," I said, my voice steady despite the fear clawing at my insides. "You know the way to those caves?" She nodded, her eyes searching mine. "About 3 miles northeast. There's a hidden entrance behind a fallen oak." I handed her the small bundle of food and ammunition I'd grabbed from the house. "Take the others and go. Stay low, move quiet, and don't look back, no matter what you hear." Her eyes widened, understanding dawning. "No, Elias, you can't," she started, but I cut her off. "Someone's got to lead them away. I'll make sure they follow me." Sam's voice cracked, his young face twisted with fear. "That's suicide. There's 6 of them." I forced a grim smile. "Maybe, but I've got nothing left to lose." I stood, checking the pistol I'd taken from Vaughn's man. "Get these kids to safety, Clara. Find people who'll give them a real home. Promise me." Tears froze on her cheeks as she nodded. "I promise, but what's your real name?" I hesitated, the weight of the question hitting me hard. "Elias Holt," I said finally. "I had a daughter once, about Lily's age. Her name was Emily." The kids looked at me, their eyes reflecting a mix of awe and sorrow. I turned away before they could say more, stepping into the snow and deliberately breaking branches, kicking up snow, anything to make my trail obvious. I fired a shot into the air, the sound echoing through the storm. Behind me, I heard Clara's voice, firm despite her tears. "Come on, everybody. We move now." As I trudged southwest, away from the caves, away from safety, I thought of Sarah and Emily, waiting for me somewhere beyond this frozen hell. For the first time in 3 years, I felt alive. The storm seemed to grow angrier as I led the hunters away from the kids, my boots crunching through the snow, leaving a trail even a blind man could follow. I fired another shot into the air, the crack of the pistol swallowed by the wind. My plan was simple, but desperate. Make enough noise to keep Caleb Dre and his men focused on me, giving Clara and the kids time to reach the caves. My heart pounded, not from fear of death, but from the thought that I might fail them. Sarah's voice echoed in my mind. "Some things are worth dying for, Elias, but more importantly, some things are worth living for." I wasn't sure I was living for anything anymore, but I'd be damned if I let those kids go back to a life of chains. The hoofbeats were closer now, thundering through the snow like the heartbeat of some monstrous beast. I crouched behind a fallen pine, my breath coming in sharp, icy bursts. I had 3 bullets left in the pistol, a hunting knife strapped to my belt, and a body worn down by 3 years of grief. The odds were grim, but I'd faced worse when the fever took my family. At least this time, I had a chance to fight. Caleb Dre's voice cut through the storm, cold and mocking. "Give it up, farmer. You're surrounded, and those kids are probably dead in the snow by now." I didn't answer, my eyes scanning the darkness. 6 riders had spread out, forming a loose circle around my position. I could see their shadows moving, their horses snorting in the cold. Dre, the scarred man, sat his horse with the confidence of a predator who'd cornered his prey. "I'm Caleb Dre," he called out. 15 years hunting runaways, and I've never lost a bounty. You're not changing that." I was about to shout back to keep his attention on me when a sound stopped me cold. Children crying, faint but unmistakable, carried on the wind. My heart shattered. No, it couldn't be. I'd given them enough time, drawn the hunters away. "You're lying," I yelled, but my voice cracked with doubt. Dre laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "Want proof? Jenkins, bring her up." A rider appeared, and my world tilted. Tied to his saddle was Beth, her small face streaked with tears, her lips blue from the cold. "We got all 6, Dre said, his voice dripping with triumph. "And that Clara girl had some interesting stories about River Hollow, stories that fetch a high price." The truth hit me like a landslide. These weren't just bounty hunters. They were part of something darker, a network that sold children to the highest bidder. And I'd led these kids straight into their trap. If I hadn't opened my door, if I'd stayed the hermit I'd been for 3 years, they might have found another hiding place. Guilt clawed at me, but Sarah's voice cut through it. "You can't save everyone, but you can save someone." I looked at Beth, her terrified eyes searching for hope, and I made a choice. "All right," I called, standing slowly, hands raised. "I'm coming out." Dre's scarred face twisted into a satisfied smirk. I stepped forward, counting the yards. 15, 10, 5. Close enough to see the cruelty in his eyes, the tobacco stains on his teeth, close enough to grab the knife from his belt and drive it into his thigh. He screamed, falling from his horse, blood staining the snow. Beth broke free in the chaos, sprinting toward the trees. I rolled behind Dre's horse as bullets flew, grabbing his fallen pistol and firing. One shot dropped Jenkins, another forced a hunter to dive for cover. Then, from the direction of the caves, gunfire erupted, followed by screams and the sound of horses stampeding. Clara's voice rang out, fierce and clear. "Nobody hurts our family!" My heart surged. The kids hadn't been caught. They'd been waiting, planning, and now they were fighting back. Dre's men, caught off guard, were falling fast. Sam and Marcus rolled rocks down from a ridge, crushing 2 hunters. Clara, wielding a stolen rifle, fired with deadly precision. The battle was over in minutes, the snow stained red, the hunters' bodies scattered like broken dolls. I found Clara standing over Dre, her face hard as stone. "How?" I asked, still reeling. She met my eyes, her voice steady. "We never went to the caves. I knew it was a trap, so we circled back, stayed downwind, and waited." Beth stepped forward, grinning despite the cold. "That wasn't me with Jenkins. It was Jenny. We switched coats to fool them." I looked at Jenny, waving from near the horses, and felt a swell of pride. These kids, beaten and broken, had outsmarted killers. The storm was breaking as we gathered the hunters' horses and supplies, the first rays of sunlight piercing the clouds like a promise. Clara handed me a stack of papers from Dre's saddlebags, forged documents claiming the kids as property, now worthless in the face of their courage. I looked at the 6 young faces around me, no longer seeing helpless orphans, but a family forged in fire. They'd fought like lions, and I'd fought beside them, not as a savior, but as one of them. For the first time in 3 years, the weight of grief lifted from my shoulders, replaced by something I'd thought was lost forever: hope. "We need to go," Clara said, her voice steady but tired. "Kane might send more men." I nodded, helping Lily onto one of the horses. She nestled against my chest, her fever breaking, her small hands clutching my coat. "Where to?" Marcus asked, his young voice stronger now, wrapped in Dre's heavy coat. I looked at the horizon, where my farmhouse waited, its broken door and bullet-riddled walls a testament to the night we'd survived. "Home," I said simply. "We'll fix the door, patch the walls, and make that house big enough for all of us." Jonah, his cough easing, looked up at me. "What about Kane, the law?" Clara held up the papers. "These say Kane's been operating without territorial authority. His whole operation's illegal. He's got no claim on us." I felt a surge of relief, but also a new resolve. Kane might come for us, but we'd be ready, together. As we rode back, the kids' voices filled the air, soft at first, then stronger. Beth and Jenny whispered about the future, Sam and Marcus planned how to rebuild the barn, and Clara rode beside me, her eyes bright with determination. Lily, still weak, murmured, "Thank you, Papa Elias." The words hit me like a thunderbolt, and I blinked back tears. I saw Sarah on the porch in my mind's eye, smiling, proud. Emily would have loved these kids, her new brothers and sisters. The farmhouse came into view, its weathered walls glowing in the morning light. It needed new windows, a stronger roof, and a bigger table for 7. But more than that, it needed laughter, life, the sound of family. As we dismounted, the kids ran ahead, their voices echoing through the snow. "Welcome home," I said quietly, and 6 voices answered in unison. "Thank you, Papa Elias." The world wasn't kind, but we'd carved out a piece of it for ourselves. We weren't just survivors, we were a family, built one choice, one fight, one moment of courage at a time. And as the sun rose, I knew we'd face whatever came next together. And as the sun rose over our patched-up farmhouse, I knew we'd face whatever came next as a family, unbreakable, unstoppable, and ready for anything. Stick around, because this is just the beginning of our fight for a new dawn. Smash that like button, drop a 1 in the comments, and join us for the next chapter of this wild ride.